Good afternoon, and welcome once again to the podcast, Life Along the Merrimack. I am host Dyke Hendrickson, and we talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. Today we have a very knowledgeable guest, a fellow who has lived near the river for many years and also works on the river in terms of making sure that commerce and transportation on the river is working well. He is Bob Cronin, a former city councilor, and here is one person who knows the Merrimack. Bob, thank you for being here.
My pleasure, Dyke. Nice to be here.
Bob, you're a longtime boater, and you also investigate boating accidents. Can you talk a little about investigating boating accidents? Do you work for the insurance companies, and are you the one that goes out and tries to determine what actually happened?
Basically, that's accurate. I work for attorneys. I work for insurance companies, and a lot of my involvement is post-crash. But I would go out and I would examine a vessel or two vessels. I would look at police reports. I would look at perhaps autopsy reports. I would look at lighting. The whole gamut, very much what you do in a car crash, except it's on the water, and you have to pay a little more attention to the angles of impact and whatnot that are left as evidence on the vessels.
And as I understand it, you do some work on the North Shore, but some work is out of this area. So, you go through the eastern region from time to time.
Yeah, I've been as far west as Nevada. I've been down in Texas, Florida, Grand Caymans. But a lot of it is Lake Winnipesaukee or up in Maine. But they're everywhere.
So one of the elements of crashes must be excessive drinking. Is that one thing that comes out? I mean, from reading the local papers, which I used to work for, incidentally, the Daily News. I mean, there are times when alcohol is involved. Do you find that?
Yes, that is obviously a factor that police and, again, myself as an investigator would look at the scene or down the road. But it's more than that. It's also lighting, it's speed, it's experience, it's distractions. You have to look at a whole gamut of things and not just try to focus on one particular thing. Though of course, alcohol is certainly a major red flag. But
well, it's often said, and this goes back a couple centuries, that the inlet to Newburyport Harbor is quite difficult. You have the tides coming in, you have the current of the river going out. Have you found that can be a reason for collisions or losing control of the boat? I mean, especially for boaters who haven't been through and aren't fully aware of how tricky it can be.
Yeah, it can be overwhelming when the wind is blowing out of the northeast and you got an outgoing tide and the seas or the mouth of the river kind of boils up a little bit, and it may be fairly reasonable on the outside, but once you hit the bar area of the river, smaller boats can get overwhelmed. In recent years, the Coast Guard has been very proactive, and during certain conditions, they'll put their 47 out there and monitor what's going on and be in radio contact with various vessels. But one of the other things, and this was one collision I did years and years ago, was a fishing boat, small fishing boat, was in a trough and was unseen by a boat going out and just ran right up the stern of it. Luckily, nobody was injured in that. But again, that's visibility and sea state. So.
Well, I was on a 14-foot power boat recently. It's got to be the smallest power boat out there. It had a 40 Honda outboard, and we had a little trouble coming both ways. 14 feet is not a large vessel for that body of water.
No, it's fine, when you get upriver. But the mouth of the Merrimack has a reputation, and that's why Station Merrimack is a surf station. They have to have a certified coxswain on station when the river is breaking, when the waves are breaking out at the mouth. So.
Well, the 47-footer which you mentioned, one characteristic of that is that it's said that if you're in heavy seas, in deeper water perhaps, and it flips over, you catch it broadside and it flips over, it'll turn around and it'll continue running. And so I actually talked with a captain of one of those, and he said, have you ever, flipped one? And he said, well, I was out west one year, and I didn't do it, but I was taking, a young recruit out there, not a recruit, a young junior officer, and he was doing the boat. He caught the wave broadside. We went over, and it was, still running, and we did get back to port. But I said, what was the ride back like? And he said, this young guy was so mortified. And so, this is the one thing you do not want to do is flip over the boat when you're qualifying for it. So the 47, does have some stories to it. But to my knowledge, the Coast Guard, does a very good job around here.
Absolutely. And just to kind of piggyback on that, before the 47 was the 44, which was also self-righting. And I had occasion in my law enforcement career to meet an officer or a trooper that was also a reservist. And he was actually on a 44 out of the mouth of the river that pitch-poled. In other words, didn't get broadside, but it flipped arguably head over heels. And he was on that and told me that story. And then he said that was quite an experience.
Well, in the situation I had mentioned, they knew it was tough water, so everyone strapped in. Everyone had a lot of gear on, and everyone survived, just like you're talking about. But it can be harrowing.
Oh yeah, you're probably talking about Cape Disappointment,
yes,
which is their training. Yeah,
that's a tough spot. Well, this may be too early to tell, but some people ask me, what about marijuana? If we know people drink on vessels. Is marijuana permitted on vessels now? Because as I understand it, even though Massachusetts permits it, if you're in federal waters or if the Coast Guard, which is a federal body, comes across you, marijuana is not a good thing to be consuming.
Right. And now add to that there are two different types of registrations in vessels. And one is your state registration. So you see the vessels with mass numbers on them. They're usually like MS, 1, 2, 3, 4, AB. But then you have others that are flagged by the federal government, and they have no numbers showing. It's just name and hailing port. And, that's clearly, unequivocally under the jurisdiction of the Coast Guard for boarding and things like that. Whereas I would almost believe that if they boarded a mass vessel, they could still invoke, federal law. But I think it's a little less likely to, unless it was huge quantities.
I'm talking to Bob Cronin, who is a veteran of the water. He, looks into accidents. And you were a former police officer, Bob. Where were you a police officer?
I started out in Andover, Massachusetts, where I was an officer for 27 years. I then moved to sheriff's office, where I commanded a Marine unit for about 4 years before I moved on to run their detective division.
And, do you find a difference between if you're pulling someone over on a road, say, on the North Shore, and you're pulling a boat over? Well, you wouldn't pull boats over, I guess, but, was it easy to work with people in the police department, or did it just depend on who you got and what they were doing?
Each and every case is always just a smidgen different. On the water, for the most part, people are trying to do the right thing. They're out to have a day on the water, and perhaps there's no mandatory education in Massachusetts. There is in some other states. So they perhaps don't know the rules of the road or speed limits or whatnot. So I think that's more educational sometimes than trying to stop somebody driving, 70 miles an hour down a back road. So.
How did you get into boating? You grew up in Andover, and you're near a river there. But how did you get so interested in boating?
I had boats available to me through friends and whatnot growing up, and we moved to Newburyport. The first thing we did was, purchase a vessel. Actually, we purchased the vessel over the winter, and then one of the things that we did was take the Coast Guard Auxiliary class right away, which gave us some working knowledge and meeting people that knew the river, et cetera. And from that point on, our boats have always continued to get bigger, it seems. It's 2-foot itis. Meanwhile, leaving Andover and going to the sheriff's office, I was running boats there too. So so it's a combination of all.
What is the size of your boat now?
I have a 39-foot boat.
So how you must take it out of the river from time to time. Where do you go? Do you go to Maine or do you go South Shore?
Either way. We used to one year go up, Maine way, up, they say Booth Bay or whatever. Next year we'd go south. We'd go down to, Buzzards Bay, Falmouth, or, Cape and the Islands type of thing. So we'd always pick our adventures.
How many does it sleep, Bob?
I always say this: it's cocktails for 8, dinner for 4, sleeps 2.
I see. Well, that's a good one. If I ever get invited, I'll be sure to leave after the first cocktail. Yeah. But
we just do those at the dock, by the way.
One time I was a reporter for the Daily News in Newburyport through a good part of the time when Bob was a city councilor. He was there for 4 terms, about 8 years. And when we were talking once, you mentioned that in the summer there's almost a second group of people in town, a second economy, because a lot of people come down, they stay on their boats, they might go for dinner, they might, go shopping. So evidently a lot of the larger boats, people come down and enjoy themselves for the weekend.
Yeah, when, again, going back into the ancient history, my marina, when we first got there, the biggest boat in our marina was 33 feet long.
Wow. And
that was like a battle wagon on the river. And now you look, almost 30 years later, there's 50-footers everywhere, 54-footers everywhere.
What do we attribute that to? I'm curious.
I think gentrification of the town or the city, more and better marinas.
More restaurants.
More restaurants. And to your comment, my comment of the second economy, in my little group on my dock, we have people from Ipswich, Georgetown, Fitchburg, North Andover, Methuen. They're coming down on a Friday night, and in some cases not leaving until they go to work on Monday. And they're going out to dinner, they're going down to Market Basket, they're shopping, and it's constant. And I have one good friend that has a couple of kids. And it's like, okay, we're going uptown, Dad. Here's $20, here's $20, here's $20. And
I mean, it makes sense. I just never thought of it because, if you're traveling on 14-foot vessels like I do, you don't get to have many people stay overnight or bring kids down. But I can certainly see that. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah. I mean, our dock has probably 6 or 7 dogs on it, that are on board for the weekend as well. I mean, that just shows you how big some of the
now
the
you're
boats are.
In condos adjacent to the river and adjacent to the slips. Is that annoying to you to have dogs or people,
Nope.
or are you pretty used to it by
Very,
now?
very used to it. We're right next to the dog park. I look out my living room slider, and I'm looking at the river. I'm looking at eagles. I'm looking at the falcons that are nesting on the Gillis Bridge.
Yeah.
We saw the dolphin from our porch. down at the marina. The Dolphin was putting on. It was a dolphin show down there.
Oh, really?
Every night for about a week.
Yeah, I saw that when I went out on my vessel. I think the newspaper had a picture of it. So that's fun.
It's just
The
incredible.
seals come down.
The seals will come down. Oh yeah, they'll go all the way up to the 95 bridge.
Oh, will they?
Yeah.
Well, talking about the river as we frequently talk about the health of the river, and one element that's been talked about is CSOs, combined sewage overflows, and this is when sewage treatment plants upriver have a lot of sewage in their plant, and then they get a large rainfall, and the enormous amount of rain and runoff comes in. It's too much for the sewage treatment plant, so they open it up. There's a big discharge, an overflow they call it. And so there have been many times in the past couple springs when a lot of sewages come into the river. And I just wondered, Bob, have you noticed that? And if so, is there a way that someone downriver, such as yourself, could learn about that and maybe say, well, we're not going to, let the dogs go in the river. We're not going fishing today. Has that affected you at all?
Absolutely. First off, from my experience on the council, they said every time there was a half-inch rain event, they would have to, and it was over a certain amount of time as well. So it's a time in amount. And we seem to be having many, many more of those,
Yes,
much more intense storms. And as such, many of us used to go over to a couple of sandbars, one right basically across the river from us at low tide, and we don't do it anymore. I mean, this was the first year I haven't jumped off High Rock in my time here. I'm just not going in the water. It's too bad. It's a shame. Several years ago, in late August, it did almost get that blue-green Caribbean, tint at high tide, and it's just brown. The scum lines on the vessels are just...
that's one thing I noticed. I did a story a year or two ago, and these college kids started a business of, rubbing off people's, the lines of, you couldn't call it sewage, but the residue or dirt on the boat. And I'd say, Jesus, how is business? And he said, in the last few years, it's been great because there seems to be discharges up the river, and people, want a clean boat from time to time.
And one of the things is you can also see that there's less and less barnacles on the boats than they have been in past years. We pulled our inflatable last week, and it was just a handful. Usually it's, hundreds. I was over at the boat yards today, and a couple of boats coming out. There's really nothing on the bottoms.
Really?
They look pretty clean, yeah.
Well, in 2016, one of the national river organizations declared the Merrimack one of the 10 most vulnerable rivers in the whole country. And this is 3 or 4 years ago. They said basically what we're talking about, the sewage treatment plants let go upriver, and some of them are quite large. At Manchester, New Hampshire, Lowell, and Lawrence, those are very large communities. Is there a way that we can deal with this, Bob? You were on the council. Did you have discussions on how we can work to improve this? Not just with the sewage treatment plants, but say with New Hampshire, because they're Merrimack, the river also goes into New Hampshire. Did you discuss these things?
Yeah, and it's sad that a lot of these sewage treatment facilities predate the Clean Water Act.
Yes.
And as a result, they have waivers. And this is all on the federal level. And without going down another show, federal level is in chaos.
Yes.
And unfortunately, nobody's focusing on this. I mean, maybe it should be radical to the point of saying, well, sanitary district, if you don't do something to clean up your mess, we aren't going to allow any more building permits. That might get somebody's attention.
I'm with Bob Cronin. This is Life Along the Merrimack. I'm host Dyke Hendrickson. Bob is a boat owner, a boat accident inspector, former city councilor. And as you go into the coming year, have you joined any organizations? Are you aware of any organizations that are trying to clean up the river in some degree?
I'm aware of organizations. I haven't taken an active part in any at this point in my life. My wife just retired. My public service has arguably come to an end, and I'm just trying to kick back a little bit and enjoy life. And so I'm keeping my fingers on the pulse, but I'm not going to jump back in with 2 feet at this point.
Well, one of the things that I attend is meetings of the Merrimack River Regional Commission. It started in the last few months. It's had 2 meetings, and the last meeting was a week ago in Haverhill, and 60 or 70 local, state, and federal employees come. They're all involved with the river. Some private citizens come. So they are trying to, at the least, for short term, trying to get a method of telling an alerting system. So if there's a big discharge in Haverhill or wherever in Lowell, it can be known to boaters downriver. It can be known to people downriver. So we'll be more aware of it. Now, one of it is an online app they're trying to figure out. Another is a flagging system that you'd put up at marinas, which Mayor Donna Holliday of Newburyport is supporting that. Would that be useful, Bob, if you knew, well, geez, it's rained for 3 days, and I just noticed on my app that, the river is going to be very dirty in the next couple of days?
It can't hurt. Anything moving forward is helpful. Most of the people that have their vessels docked on the river know if it rains, we're going to get a surge coming down.
Yes.
You can literally see it.
Yeah.
And so it's, but on the other hand, I think it'd be great for marinas to get involved in some way like that. I think it'd be great to have the app. The boat ramps in Salisbury and Amesbury and Newburyport and further upriver.
And also Cashman Park, for instance.
Yeah.
As you know, Cashman Park is the largest state-run boat area in this area. And, people might come down and see that it's a red flag and say, well, let's not go in today because, on the other hand, it would let them know that this is a day where there could be some significant pollution. So maybe as a short-term element, that could happen. You were on the city council for 8 years, and again, I'm talking to Bob Cronin on Life Along the Merrimack. What are some of the things that you felt good about on the council, different elements that the council was able to pass? For myself, I think the harbor master's headquarters on the river was a very good project. Well, what are some of the ones that you remember?
Well, I was going to mention that the harbor master shack, it gets a finishing piece to the downtown area. It looks a lot more professional than Reed's Ferry sheds that were there.
Plus, it has public bathrooms. One thing the harbor master used to complain about is, I'm a nice as guy as the next guy, but we don't have a bathroom. And people would knock on the door every Saturday and Sunday. My grandmother needs a bathroom. My kid, you know what I mean? That was helpful.
Well, he didn't even have a bathroom. So that's one thing that I'm pretty happy with. The other thing, of course, is just the whole rail trail system.
Yes.
Because that draws people to the water, and the more people come to the water, that there is an opportunity that they may go up, into the shops or the restaurants and have a bite to eat and buy something. But I do a lot of walking, and the rail trails, especially near the water, is sometimes there are so many people on it, it looks fake. It looks as though it's a over-directed movie scene.
Yeah.
This
That absolutely works. It really does.
And so I'm real happy about that as well. Those two.
And the boardwalk, which of course, has been there for, 30 years or so, that continues to draw people. Of course, you folks improved it several times. It does cost money to keep it in good standing, especially with a quick-moving river. But the boardwalk and certain things have been helpful as well. Were you in favor of the parking garage and, as a result, more parking downtown?
I was not in favor of the location of the parking garage. I find it's an extremely poor location. I really wished it was somewhere that would have tied maybe the tannery to the downtown and been a little more convenient for people going downtown. As of right now, it's not seeing a lot of heavy use. Maybe that'll change.
Well,
Time will tell.
there is a whole area now, as I think you know, that on the eastern side of the parking area that has been blocked off now, and they're going to start creating more park area. And so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Supposedly people can go back to the parking garage, but they're losing, 60 to 80 spaces there.
Yeah, I think it's even more than that, Dyke. I just saw something in the Daily News last week that said it's approximately 50,000 square feet of fill that they want to put in.
Wow.
So they want to make that more of a park. And that was one of the legal notices.
Well, one of the parks that I don't think worked out so well is right on Merrimack Street there. It's built 4 or 5 years ago. It's the one with the white shells on it. And it's right in the sunlight. And it seems, I never see people there in the summer because it doesn't have any shade. And in the winter, it's too cold. But I remember that as an example of it didn't seem to go through all the city processes. There was one, I think the redevelopment authority did it on their own. And I wonder if they'll ever revisit that because that does not look like Newburyport.
Yeah, I never see anybody there like you say. The shells, even though it's very much like Cape Cod.
Yeah.
It just doesn't fit. It's just not a flow. And when people go to the river, they want to look at the river, not be up near the road.
Right. Well, we just have a minute or two left, Bob. When you think about things that, you've enjoyed in Newburyport since coming here a few decades ago, what have you found useful here? You have a boat, you're on the water. It sounds like it's a pretty good existence.
It really is. And we really get to walk everywhere. We can just walk out our door and be downtown, and there's, 24 restaurants, people, everything there. Exercise is beautiful. You can use the rail trails and get out. It's a great location and great community.
And in the next year or so, they've planned a very large area called Waterfront West, which is on the waterfront between, say, the old Black Cow and Michael's. Do you have any guesses as how that's going to play out?
From what I'm reading and between the lines and the tea leaves, that it does sound as though the current proposal is going to fall pretty far short of passing. But once that, they obviously are going to try to come back with something a little more reasonable and see what that is. Hopefully it'll be something that has the density and scope of what Newburyport wants, and not something, very densely packed. And
well, as a city councilor for 8 years, you did a lot of listening. Do you miss the council, Bob?
Some days I do. Some days I don't. And I'm pretty much enjoying retirement right now. And I think that's the direction I'm headed.
Are there any sturgeon left in the river?
Sure.
I always put my toughest question to the end.
Sure.
Well, of course, I haven't seen one, but I don't hear about sturgeon being pulled out. And that's one of the oldest fishes in the North Shore.
Right. You'll see them randomly jumping.
Really?
They for whatever reason, they would just randomly jump. There's a lot up near the 95 bridge.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of fish.
Well, that's good to hear. I think we'll leave on that note. Sturgeon jumping in the Merrimack. Bob Cronin was my guest today. This was Life Along the Merrimack. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back again next week. Thank you again.